The biggest problem in security that remains unsolved is flat networks inside the cloud and data center that allow threats to move laterally and compromise vulnerable targets. But microsegmentation using traditional firewalls is too complex and time-consuming. There's a better approach: Edgewise Zero Trust Auto Segmentation. Edgewise is impossibly simple microsegmentation. Using the identity of machines and software that are communicating, Edgewise offers the strongest protection that adapts automatically to changes. Protect any application in any cloud without any changes to your network by visiting securityweekly.com/Edgewise. Welcome back, everyone, to Paul's Security Weekly. Quick announcement: attend RSA 2020 February 24th through the 28th. There'll be some really great events this year at RSA. In addition to the awesome talks, there is going to be an engagement zone where if you install the app, you can find people that are interested in the same security topics that you are. There's like a speed dating for InfoSec, and it's not like dating in that sense. It's like finding people with similar interests, birds of a feather sessions. They've got an entire area set aside for that. They've got an entire area set aside for startups, but also like villages, like they have at some of the other technical conferences. So there'll be ones on vehicle and car hacking. There'll be ones on IoT where you can get hands-on with folks and presentations in that area. So we've done a lot with RSA this year. They appeared on the show and did a webcast with them. And I learned about some of the ways in which that conference has grown. And of course, there's still the gigantic vendor area where you can go shop around and talk to, I think they said over 500 or 600 vendors.
Crazy.
Yeah. But cool technical stuff and cool, like basically they've made it easy to have hallway con, right?
Yep.
I don't want to say they formalized it, but they've made it easier and given you space. There's going to be a coffee bar, and it's right below where Broadcast Alley is, where we'll be for all of RSA. So like, if you come visit us RSA and some of us have some time, totally like, let's just go hang out, have some coffee. We may have some bourbon to put in the coffee, which would be awesome.
They will have bourbon to put in the coffee.
Venom from RSA, close your ears. So it's going to be a lot of fun. Make sure that you visit the landing page for that, which is securityweekly.com/RSAC 2020. And now we're going to talk about stories, where I guess we have to talk about Jeff Bezos. And his phone getting hacked. Is that... Why do I not want to talk about this? Is that... I don't understand.
I don't know.
I don't know, because there's so much conjecture around it. And reasoning, and I don't know.
There's a lot of speculation.
I mean, I guess...
there's one thing that's great about doing this podcast is we do get to speculate.
If there was more details about the code injection and that you were sure there was actually a code injection, that might be interesting, but it could just be that he clicked that link saying, you won $1 million or something.
Well, apparently it was through WhatsApp, and there was some malware that was embedded in there that they've traced back to Israel. Is that really true? That's what I read. I almost don't want to. I haven't validated
that's
that.
One of like 4 different stories that I've seen.
Right, and there was pictures of his private parts as well that they're now like is resurfacing, right? Because that was a story. I don't know.
Yeah, it was. Now there's all kinds of leaks coming out of there. There was all kinds of.
What?
Leaks coming out of there. I'm not even going to ask what the hell you.
Oh my god!
Leaks of other data.
Oh, data. Okay,
yeah,
data.
No, it wasn't.
Data.
Yeah, tired of the constant drip. Yeah. No, there was theories that they were trying to acquire, more credentials, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But there's not anything like concrete about, the rock hard details of this.
The report itself from FTI was like they did a pretty good job of like covering like how they were kind of going about the forensic acquisition and kind of all that. It was a pretty big jump in a lot of cases, and I want
to step back as we look at Amazon as a target, right? And we think about the credit cards that they hold.
Yep.
And so millions of people, right, store their credit cards in Amazon. I think up until this point, everything that I've heard publicly and privately, right? Like, I haven't heard anything about like, someone's like got something, or they're like your credit card is at risk. And you can just imagine when you're arguably the world's largest online retailer storing all of those credit cards, the effort and the focus and the team that's behind protecting them, right? And like if you're listening or you know anyone on that team, like props to you folks. I think you're doing a great job and you have a tremendous amount of responsibility. But then you look at Amazon's other business in AWS and all of the companies that basically host all of their infrastructure and a lot of their data in AWS and how juicy a target that is. And also prompts to that team as well. You folks are doing an amazing job in giving us resources. And of course there's going to be issues. I mean, Amazon has over 400 different services that they're offering in AWS today, right? The resources to protect that are pretty amazing. So I think the team in Amazon's doing a great job. That's not to say there haven't been issues. Of course there's going to be issues. With that much attack surface and that large of a company, of course there's going to be issues. But in large part, I think in everything I've heard publicly and privately, you're doing a great job. And so keep it up. So we come back to Jeff Bezos. So maybe you want to attack Amazon. Are you going to compromise like one of the most public founders and CEOs? And what you think Jeff has access to some of that stuff? Like I don't know early on that they took away all his credentials. Like you're way too high profile to have access to anything anymore. And he was probably reading what I've read about. He was probably no.
But there's two sort of vectors on this. One vector is the because I can vector.
Right.
I mean, if you're going to go after somebody, you're not going to go after Chuck Stevers, who's the director of marketing. You're going to go after the biggest fish you can find. So why not? I mean, if you can pull off some elaborate attack and just say, hey, I was the guy that cracked Bezos' phone, you get all this cred. But the other one is a
cred. Yeah, but I mean, people like that, they don't hack for street cred
burn a
anymore.
WhatsApp?
I know, but the other one, but the other one is just credential stuffing. I mean, he probably does have the names and the numbers and the emails and the internal emails of. I'm not saying they're stealing passwords or anything good. I'm saying if you want to develop an attack against Amazon,
so you're going to use it for recon. I think that's a valid theory.
You dump his whole phone, and he's got the names, the home addresses, the WhatsApp IDs of everybody at Amazon. You just got something pretty valuable to proceed with a more elaborate attack.
If you're going to attack, if I'm going to attack a company that has an elite security team that's that high profile and that large of a company, right? I think that your strategy that has to be near the top of your list is you're going to try and flip an insider. You're going to try and either plant or flip an insider. To have that, you're going to need some knowledge.
Yeah.
Maybe Doug is onto something in that you're going to maybe collect some of that knowledge from other people in the organization to get it later.
Or maybe maybe it's on his phone. Maybe you find somebody he's having a relationship with at the company. Maybe you find somebody he's got pictures of, or who knows what he's got on his phone. I mean, think about what's on your phone. He's just like everybody else in some ways.
But it's certainly not WhatsApp or TikTok.
No, not at all. But I mean, if you dumped his text, and he's texting his wife, he's texting whomever, you don't know what you might collect out of that. So. But I think it still comes back to because
I really hope he's using Signal, though. That's just,
Well, he's probably not, but maybe.
Obviously, he's using WhatsApp.
Well, yeah. But I mean, I just think that part of it is because we did it, so they they target him, and secondly, maybe you get something really good off his phone, just like they used to try to steal CEOs' laptops.
It's really hard, though. I mean, it's easy for us as security to be the Department of No and say, like I do with my kid, like no TikTok, no WhatsApp, like the risk profile is too high. But that we all know that doesn't work. Well, like what's our recourse for protection? Is it an invasion of privacy? I mean, when you do that with your kids, that's one thing. We had Chris Hadnaghi on the phone. It's like, this is for the safety of your children. You should very much monitor what they're doing because of bullying, because of child predators, and the risk is too high. And Chris's advice was to do it in an open environment, and I very much do it with my kids today. My oldest son just started middle school, and I'm like, dude, look, like, Dad knows what you're doing on your phone, right? And then there's instances where he's at school events and stuff like that. I'm always like, everyone's like crowding around his phone laughing, like, what's he's doing, right? And he knows that it's not so much, I'm like, I don't want to spy on you, but it's for your own protection. But how do you then take that and put it on one of the
CEO
of one of the largest companies.
And the answer
in
is
the world,
you don't.
right?
And I have one other theory. My other theory is the James Bond theory, that it's something it's something far more sophisticated than what we know.
Mr. Bond, I want you to die.
Exactly. So he's got Saudi princes. He's got Israeli, who knows what.
Was that Goldfinger? That was Gold. I haven't watched Bond.
It is
in a long
Goldfinger.
time.
Yeah. I want you to die. So you get the laser and Sean Connery and come here, money, penny. But I mean, there might be something more elaborate being played at a different level, and he's being targeted by somebody in some game of billionaires kind of scenario that we don't really know what the objective was or why it happened. It was
just like a new TV show, kind of like Game of Thrones became a Billionaires?
Yeah, exactly. Well, it's a lot. It's like that, I think. So, I mean, because if you're playing this game and you've got endless resources, and it could even be something stupid. Like, oh yeah, I was at this thing the other day, and he cut my private jet off on the airport, and his yacht was bigger than mine, so I'm going to fix his wagon. And you go out and you spend. I mean, how much money could a billionaire spend, and it be like us going out and spending $5,000? So somebody drops $20 million, which isn't even the interest they made that morning, and they go, yeah, we want to we're going to mess with this guy. And let's just make him look stupid. And it's a counting coup kind of problem like James Bond. So now it's just like, oh, yeah, we got you. And now you look bad. And that's it. That's the end. I win. So, yeah, like Game of Thrones kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I don't know. Still, though, like a WhatsApp, an iOS exploit, just to get the level of information and have a self-destruct sequence, and essentially you almost have to jailbreak the phone remotely. You're talking about an exploit chain that at this point in iOS is like 7 layers deep. I mean, that thing's worth millions, if not more.
So that comes back to my James Bond billionaire game theory, which is like, I don't care about the money that this is worth because it's irrelevant to me. So I just want to make the guy look bad because he pissed me off the other night at the cocktail party reception for billionaires. And I'll drop $20 million, and I don't care about the product that you might have got. And I hired a huge team. I mean, you can see somebody going out and hiring a huge team of people and saying, we want you to do this. And them going, yeah, okay. And the guy writes you a check, and they go, wow, we could utilize this exploit to do all kinds of elaborate things. And the guy goes, no, I don't want that. I just wanted to make this guy look like an idiot in the national press.
Give me some pictures to publish.
Yeah, give me some pictures to prove it, and that's all I really care about. And then take the whole thing and flush it. Have a nice day.
I mean, that's about the only thing that makes a whole lot of sense.
I know. I mean, it really does.
Give NSO Group a bunch of money and let them find it.
And it's money you just have to understand that it's irrelevant money. I mean, it's somebody that amount of money that exploit is worth is just of no significance to them. It's inconceivable.
Yeah, I concede that. Although the whole baseline around like how much data was coming out of the phone on average over the last 6 months, and like how they baselined all of that, and then there's a big spike of.
Yeah.
I think it was even like hundreds of kilobits. It wasn't a bunch of data, like an update, an app update. Like obviously they factored in a lot of those, but like these phones do so many things. Baseband update, an SS7 update or push for carrier data across the SIM card. Like there's all kinds of stuff that like you're not going to know at that level.
Okay, so it could be like I saw this girl that was in the background with him at Davos, and I really want her number. And I don't care how much money it costs me. Get me that number. And the only place. So now it's like a Tom Cruise movie. It's like Mission Impossible 7. It's really boring.
Don't say that too loud. Someone's going to make a movie about this.
I get a cut.
You're reminding me of what was that movie where they bring people in and they hunt people? Like there's really rich people.
Yeah.
And they're like hunting people. Like it's.
What was the name of that? I don't remember what the name of that was.
The listeners like screaming.
The Game or something like that?
Something like that.
But I mean, then there's the other one would be the conspiracy one, which is like that there is, these large-scale government entity kind of things, and it's nation state, and Bezos has like a secret code that Israeli intelligence wants or the Saudi intelligence wants, and so they hire the Israelis to go after Bezos to get the code back, and Tom Cruise is hanging from wires in the secret vault at Amazon, and Catherine Zeta-Jones is doing some kind of yoga slither through a bunch of laser beam things to get to the one biometric panel that they have to use the cut off hand from that guy that cleans up to open the door.
I think that was Demolition Man, and that was an eye.
Okay. No, that's in Blade Runner, the eye.
And in demolition.
Oh, yeah, that's right. There's an
Demolition.
yeah, that's right. There's an
Anyway,
demolition.
I want to talk about vulnerabilities in AMD ATI Radeon graphics cards, which apparently the attack vector is VMware, which is kind of interesting. Especially, we've been doing this 15 years now, and there's like words that show
specially crafted.
It's always specially crafted, right? There's like language that shows up in every vulnerability report that is the same and specially crafted.
Malformed pixel shader.
But specially crafted is like the heart and soul of like almost every vulnerability, right? Like you have
it's redundant.
Specially craft something to trigger a vulnerability, right? And I love when the press uses that term because it's like, well, you could write an entire paper or article or do a whole hour like training video on this exploit, just talking about how you specially crafted that and what exactly that is. And there was probably arguably hundreds of hours from a team of people that were really just basically going towards the press referring to it as specially crafted, which I think does a disservice to the researchers, right? Like, oh, it's specially crafted.
Well, but it's the level of the article too. I mean, you got to write to your audience, and if you decide, in your however many column inches this story is, that you're gonna see Appendix 5, 7, 9, 12, and 34 for the full, analysis. Nobody's going to read that. I mean, people don't want. I mean, I agree with you, but
people that read it, but it doesn't make for good press.
It would be great to have a nice link there that you could click to and say, I want to read about the specially crafted thing. But
they call it a malformed pixel shader, which I thought was kind of interesting. It's a vulnerability in the DLL for the driver for the graphics card.
Yeah. So it's
but it goes into it being inside of a virtual machine that causes an out of bounds inside of the virtual machine. So is it the combination of the graphics card and how that's being rendered by the DLL in conjunction with? I'm assuming it's using like VMware host or VM host, VMX exe. So like, what is actually where is this happening? Is it happening inside of a virtual environment? Does that give you access to the host? Like I got to read into that a little
I don't think so.
I know it's
I can't see
that whole relationship between your virtual environment and your graphics drivers and the hardware on your card, right? It kind of sounds like that the operating system with the graphics card and the drivers going to a screen. That was cool, and that's not always the case. But in this case, the virtualization of that graphics driver and interaction with VMware was where they found the flaw. And it's why I mentioned in our first segment with Doug Song that the Talos team has been doing some fantastic research.
Those dudes are so smart over there. Like, hats off to them. There's some really, really smart guys, and their exploit, like the way they release their stuff and kind of disclose it, it is really, you can comprehensively walk through a very, very technical exploit that otherwise, I've seen a lot of places kind of describe them and document them, and they don't come out, and you're just kind of scratching your head by the end of it. These guys walk through the pointer references, they look at the crash analysis, they provide pretty much all the info. Like,
and there is a link. There is a link to Tyler's point. There is a link to all of that in the article as well.
Oh yeah, there.
Which again is hard to kind of convey during like the news discussion piece, right? And hopefully we can cover that in other outlets and stuff like that. But yeah, they're doing some awesome work. Oh, null pointer dereference. There you go. If you want to research it further.
I still don't think it went outside the guest. I think there would have been a lot bigger headline if you could remote code execute in the outside shell, because it says they were executing in VMware-VMX, so that would be the running process.
Inside the virtual machine.
Inside the virtual machine. I don't think that.
That's a running process for workstation, or maybe.
Yeah, it says workstation.
That's not ESX.
Yeah, so
Windows
it's not going to jump outside that.
Yeah, so tested versions: Radeon RX 550 series, VMware Workstation 15 with Windows 10 x64 as the guest VM.
Right, but it's still only allowing you to access that process inside the guest. So even though I don't think that would have been a lot bigger headline.
Potentially.
I hope so.
Agreed. I find it interesting that we're still talking about articles that have the headline "How to Prep for Windows 7 in server 2008 end of life.
As this hasn't been coming for
no, but like let's just look at the headline for a moment, like how to prep for it. Like your prep for it is to friggin' upgrade to the latest version of Windows. Like,
but that's not always feasible. I mean, I had a conversation about this the other day, and yeah, that's my initial reaction is just, come on. But the reality for a lot of people is they spend a lot of time gearing up, building out, stabilizing, securing, and managing a very large environment that's homogeneous. And all of a sudden, and I know it's not all of a sudden that they've known it. It's end of life was coming the day it was released. I mean, we knew somewhere out in the future, but it's one thing to say upgrade. It's another thing to say, okay, let's drop $10 million of our budget and upgrade when we don't really need to. I mean, it's just a really hard sell when you sit down with the board and they're going, but everything's working. And you go, well, yeah, but they're not going to patch it anymore. And they're like, yeah, but it's working right now. And so it always ends up being
Windows 10 is so stable, and it has a much longer life cycle path that
completely agree.
From a return on investment, like I could see the actual rollout piece being, that's a lot of planning. There's a lot of moving parts, and you have, if you're geographically dispersed, then obviously you've got to plan that.
And organizations have these long budget lives. I mean, they want it. These are assets that they have to depreciate over, a long period of time. It's a huge investment. So for them to just say, okay, well, we were planning on this being here for 10 years, and now it's gone. We need to just, start over. Let's retrain everybody.
Yeah, the end user
if you
workstation.
Are a consumer.
Yeah. Oh, consumer. Yeah, no excuse.
But in the enterprise, the end user workstation problem is going to be around for a long time. I feel like, because it's really hard to upgrade and replace all of the because they're physical machines that people have, in sometimes multiple, right? Maybe they have a desktop and a laptop, and it's something that a user's it's physical hardware. It's not virtual. It's not a container.
And think about it. We've all upgraded operating systems, most of us many times. I mean, you make the jump. At some point, you said, I'm going to give up. I'm going to give up DOS, and I'm going to run Windows 98. And it's really painful when you go to a server that you know how to manage and you've got everything stable and you go, okay, let's roll out a new one.
Oftentimes full of pain and regret, like some decisions in all of our lives.
And now you don't know how to do things you knew how to do yesterday, and you got 100 other things going on, and you don't know the safety and sanctity of what you're rolling out. And you're going, well, let's wait another. I mean, it's just easy to make that let's wait another 6 months decision, because then we don't have to go through this suffering. When we really need to, but we don't want to go through it. So it's like real easy to say, well, as soon as we get this email problem fixed and we upgrade the email servers, how about we talk next year and we'll look at the budget.
But does this problem get better over time? Because really, what is on users' computers that needs to run on their computer? As we extrapolate much of what they do, developers are going to use Docker and containers to build out and test environments that aren't as dependent on the operating system. I'm not saying mutually exclusive, but they aren't as dependent on the operating system. The applications we use are largely hosted in the cloud or through SaaS providers. So does this problem get better and go away? And dare I say, does something like a Chromebook become more of an option? However, as Tyler and I have kind of theorized, when that starts becoming more and more of an embracement and adoption, at what point do we start going after the Chrome OS? Because largely, and listeners, please write in if you have anything on this, I don't really see people attacking this operating system and this platform, maybe largely because it hasn't seen wide-scale adoption in the enterprise, right? But just certainly like there's a lot of Chromebooks out there. I don't have the math in front of me, but I'm sure you could. I mean, Chromebooks are selling, on sale for $100. There's people buying those and using those as their everyday computing.
Why not?
Well, even OS X platform, you're looking at a relatively small market share. In fact, a very, very small market share in the corporate enterprise. And so that target, just like the Chromebooks, has not necessarily come around. But we also thought that VDI, or like zero clients, would be like the huge wave of the future, where everything is, went to the hypervisor and
you think
decentralize
But Tyler, do you think that's just a technology hurdle? That
I think it's a licensing hurdle. I think honestly, VMware priced themselves out. Like if they would have continued down the path, I seen a huge push for everything went ESXi, everything went, Horizon Orchestrator. It was all VDI. You could have golden images. Those are deployed. There's lots of enterprises that still do that. But I believe the cost of licensing and the cost to have that infrastructure and maintain it with the kind of knowledge and people to do that continuously got so high.
It's a double whammy. I got to license Windows, and I also have to license VMware software.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
And that's expensive.
Yep, and I think Windows is with the new kind of rolling idea of how they're going to start rolling their updates and continue those long-term service agreements with their product. I think that's kind of a step in the right direction. We've seen, XP to Windows 7 was a huge adoption, a big pain in the ass. Everything sucked, right? And then we've seen 7. It was a great operating system for a really long time. 10 was better, and substantially better with the no stability issues that we've seen with those iterations in between. That adoption has now made it much easier, I think, for a lot of these corporations to start saying, these role and life cycles for particular assets is not as big a headache, and so we can continue to do this and do this much quicker with our hardware.
But I also think that the Windows 7 and Server 2008 is also large. I think we're kind of glossing over the fact that there's a lot of legacy software out there, right? And I think it takes two forms if we're to think about it really practically, right? Like one is the browser. And I mean, IE is still a thing, right? And you may still have internal applications that require older versions of that browser. Yeah. And look, I mean, having done a lot of development lately, I just like snapping your fingers and going, hey, we're going to have a new version of the app and it's going to be in the cloud. That's not a reality. Like the resources and planning it takes, especially when we talk about enterprise applications. We did a segment yesterday on enterprise security about SAP. Like you can't just snap your fingers. There's way too many moving pieces. I think it's easy for us pundits to say, and you read a lot of articles out there and be like, oh, well, people should just upgrade to Windows 7. There's a lot of things that hold people back. One, legacy applications that require older browsers. The other two is legacy applications that run on the operating system that are still a thing today, right? And especially specialized applications that are connected to specialized equipment. I mean, Doug, you and I have worked for universities, right? ICS stuff in research departments and hospitals, right?
Well, you said SAP, Oracle, and all these kind of giant enterprise products that have both end-user components that are running on desktops. They have back-office components running on servers. And you say, I'm just going to scrap all my server 2012 or whatever, and I'm going to get rid of them. And that may not be as simple as it says, because when you call your engineers who are managing your Oracle massive, that runs your company, and you call them and go, can we just switch all this stuff? They're going to say, no, we've got to study it.
You can, but it's
going to cost a lot of money. We're going to have to test it all. Maybe there's a place out there where we get to this kind of OS convergence that's driven by things like Docker, where we just spin up stuff on the fly. And there's still going to be some kind of backwater system that's out there that's the ESXi or something of the world. But if we're always just spinning up user operating systems on the fly and doing away with them when they're done with them, then the version doesn't really matter anymore. It can just be who cares what it is? It's just my.
See, but I really
think that's where hypervisors.
I agree, but I agree in the hypervisor point, because I think it's all about maintaining your environments, right, and making your environment defined by software infrastructure as code, right? That alone doesn't solve the problem.
No.
What that enables you to do is constantly test. Right? So that when there's a new version of a library, of a software application, of an operating system, it doesn't just make it magic like, oh, we can just move to that and it's all great. It's still the same scenario where I've got an operating system on physical hardware, an application running on it, and I'm going to upgrade the libraries, the software, the operating system that supports my application. And on physical hardware, it's painful. What containers, virtualization, and cloud provide is an easier way to test that. It's an easier way for me to say, we go back to the Equifax breach and a lot of the application servers that have issues. It's not that the physical hardware versus virtual is any different, but the difference is the ability to test. It's that I can say, let me go take the latest version, let me run my application on it, and let me see what breaks. And then you know what? Let me change my environment and let me go iterate. I don't have to go submit a request for that. I don't have to go buy additional hardware. I don't have to go get maybe additional licenses, right? I can just iterate and test and go, hey, guess what? I've got this running on the new version that I think works. It's passed all my tests. Let's now go put it through some security testing, and then let's go push it into production.
And that's where we get to these, we get away from I call this macro change. So it's like 7 is not the same thing as 10. I mean, it's a different thing. Mm-hmm. But someday we got to get to a point where we don't really need these macro changes, except maybe, once in a lifetime. I mean, look at cars. Cars have micro changes. I mean, engines don't change that much. They make them a little better. They tweak them, and they make these micro changes to them. But, your windshield wipers are a little better than they were in 1908, but they're still the same basic idea. And I think if we get to a point where we've got operating system platforms that are stable and robust, maybe we don't need that much more change in that, and we can start making little micro tweaks and say, well, we're going to just tweak this app a little bit. The Docker, we can test it all. We test it over a large audience because we roll out a Docker and a whole, millions of people download that and run it, and they go, oh, there's a little problem here. We just tweak that a little bit. We tweak this a little bit.
But I still think
I would argue we're almost there, though.
I agree
with the browser.
I agree.
We're almost there, but I think we're in a period of time where it's still a lot of work in engineering to get your legacy loosely termed, right? Get your older applications onto these newer platforms, right?
Yep.
And then continue to iterate.
Work there, yeah.
Right. But that continuous integration, testing, continuous push to that new technology is going to put us in a much better place. I mean, I'm in that place right now, right? Like I've got a service running on, infrastructure in the cloud that is heavy infrastructure, right? It's an operating system, and I'm running apps on top of it. Now I'm trying to take that, push it into a containerized microservice environment, and then push it into the cloud. That first push of your legacy application into that new environment is a lot of work. I mean, there's no way that you can slice it and dice it in any which way other than it's a lot of work. Once you get there, you break up the work into smaller chunks, you can more easily test it, and you can iterate faster to push forward. But that initial push, I think, is where we're at now with technology, which very much, again, coming back to this being a security show, very much speaks to your security, right?
Yeah.
Because if you can make more changes more frequently and test them more efficiently and more quickly, you're in a much better position, obviously, for security.
And we're seeing
that speaks to you being a single entity, right? Like when you have these applications for like law enforcement or multi-agencies where you're talking about, all of these places and all of the entities that have a stakeholder, or even a business where there's multiple stakeholders. That means everyone has to come on board. All of the equipment has to be able to get to that point. And you're right, that first big push and getting that project rolling to get everybody on board and understand the cost and get to the point where the data is going to be moved. That's kind of the tipping point where it gets much easier. But we're at that point where
someone's got to prove it. And we touched on it with Doug Song a little bit, right? Like someone's got to be I don't want to spoilers for the Unicorn Project, right? But someone's got to be that rebellious group that proves it, right? And we've all seen this because we've all worked in technology for the better part of 20 years, right? That you got to be the person that proves it. You take that one small piece and you show how you've taken that from the legacy architecture to the newer architecture, what the value is and the benefit to the business. Then all the other units kind of fall in place, right? It's like what we said, if you've got 100 different groups that are doing development, you take the group that is the most forward-thinking, the most innovative and receptive to the change, you say, hey, look, let's just try it this way. Like, let's try and get buy-in, and that takes work and time. And then once you do it, you show that to the other groups, and they're like, wow, yeah, like if we do this, we're going to take a little bit of hit in productivity. They're going to take a little bit of hit in bug and feature fixes maybe in the short term, but when we come out of it, we're going to be able to iterate much faster and be more efficient.
But if we go to this hypervisor cloud model, we can make it so vanilla in the localized environment, that those are all micro changes. They're just optimizations, because that now I remember just a few years ago. I mean, well, more than a few now, but trying to just put a desktop computer together using Gen 2. And
oh God!
I mean,
oh Lord,
days and days. We challenged ourselves. We're going to get graphics running on this. We're going to do this. It was crazy because the hardware didn't support the driver, which didn't support the.
Gen 2 is the ultimate in flexibility and control.
But it's a great example of this, because Gen 2 was this thing that was so hard to do. That's why we were doing it. And it didn't support hardly anything. And it was kind of like, write your own driver, don't be a wimp. But I mean, as we make that vanilla environment for most things, then that hypervisor pulls that away, and so you're always dealing with the same.
Yeah, but there's still it's a scale.
I don't see it now.
But this is an interesting topic though, because it's a scale, right? And it's exactly
that's what I'm saying. It's going from macro to micro.
It's the work that I'm doing right now, right? Like I'm looking at all the different options. Like you want to run XYZ open source application, right? And they'll make available, hey, like here's this script or this AMI that's already exists in Amazon, and you can go run it. I'm like, yeah, that runs and that's great. But that doesn't quite work for me. So I can go all the way to the other extreme and go, I'm going to use Gen 2 and create my own cloud environment, my own Linux operating system, and write all my own driver. I've got the ultimate flexibility and control, super hard, and I may get it running, and a change coming down the pipeline is going to break it 2 weeks later, right? The other extreme to that is like I can go one click, I can install an AMI and the app is running, but it's got a lot of shit missing that I really need. Where we need to be is somewhere in between developing our requirements to say, this is kind of where I need to be. I think we need to be closer to the Gen 2 than the like point, shoot and click and go.
I don't know, because that other end is awfully appealing when you start talking about production, because you got to keep it running.
But there's huge security implications, right? As we look at, Black Hills has done a lot of research on this, right? When you get into those elastic environments that's spinning up infrastructure automatically, they're not spinning it up with your configs in mind. They're spinning it up with whatever the default is. And guess what? Whatever the default is horribly insecure.
Yeah,
and
but if I can do that, I can spend my time focusing on security and not spend my time on writing drivers.
If you can even change it.
Well, yeah, and that's another whole matter. But I mean, it doesn't mean it has to be. It can't. It needs to be good. I'm not saying that.
And that's and good means that there's a balance between control and convenience.
But if I can get to the point where I'm just managing my objects internally and I have a homogeneous environment, I don't have to worry about my video drivers and for my sound drivers and my mouse drivers. I can just focus on making my environment safe, secure, and fast.
If I can focus on the applications and the code, that's utopia. That's utopia for security.
So that's where I sit inside that hypervisor.
You're taking that responsibility of security and you're really putting it on someone else. And that's scary to me.
It would be nice to see, like, just like we were talking about, like, what's the next iteration of the passwordless world, right? Like, from a hypervisor standpoint, what's the next iteration of the hypervisor, or bringing this down? Like Docker and Kubernetes were kind of going down that path, but what happens when we start to look at like individual threads or processes or libraries? If we can micro-contain those libraries and offer them up and have some form of integration, like those protocols where we're starting to standardize on, like, WebSockets and some of the HTML stuff. If we took that down even a further layer and standardize on some of the functionality within the libraries and microtize those, like, there's got to be some forward-thinking people out there that could come up with the next iteration of what hypervisor is and be able to offer that in a stack. Right?
And the problem is there's way too many options today.
Yeah.
Way too many options, right? Like what you're saying, Tyler, I agree, and it kind of makes me think about like the software composition analysis. And how we can take those libraries, right, and separate them out and be like, look, when I get a library from an external source, it should never send data to the internet, because that's really, that library's there from my application. We can get down to that level of granularity. That's great. But that's just in one platform and one set of technologies, right? You can do that in Python. Great. What happens when you go to React? What happens when you go to Vue? What happens when you go to some other completely different, whatever the next hipster technology is, and that basically falls apart? And that's where
how do you get those to the micro level where they interact with each other and the hardware directly. Like, I think that's like the hypervisor was kind of doing that, but then obviously we have all of the OSs built on top of those as well. So there's no, I think we're in that middle stage still.
Yeah.
The exciting part is like we're all gonna have jobs and be addressing these issues for like probably
the rest of our lives.
The rest of our lives, right?
When this is the Security Weekly Nursing Home Edition, we'll still be
I actually think that's kind of exciting. I do along these lines, and what I've been working on recently is there's a lot. There's bad advice on the internet as to how to configure this stuff, right? Specifically,
that was the understatement of probably all time.
A lot of bad advice on the internet for a lot of reasons. But if you're looking at deploying applications and infrastructure securely, a lot of the examples in Marcin, our developer, and we're talking about this. We're like we have a goal and we want to accomplish it, and we're like, when we look at stuff out there, it seems like people have figured something out for like a test environment. And they've gone to Medium, and they've written a blog post, and it's here's how to get it running in your test environment. And you're like, that's great. I'm deploying my app in production. I don't know about you. Like, you did a great job writing that post. I don't want to take anything away from them because there's a lot of research that's gone into Pluralsight courses that I've watched, Medium blog posts, in people's personal blog. A lot of great research, but
how do you do it for real?
That's not like production ready. It seems like the folks that have done this in production either can't share what they've done or just haven't shared what they've done. So I guess it's a call to the community. If you've done this and it's running in production, like write in and tell us, like, yes, I did the test, but then I did it also in production, and I wrote a blog post about it, because you can just tell looking at the configurations, they're not protecting their secrets. They're not accounting for the continuous integration and continuous deployment. They're not including all of the testing that has to go into that process, right? They're not accounting for persistent storage. I can take an open source app, I can deploy it out to Beanstalk. Great, I got it running, but what happens when I need to update it? Now all my config goes away, and it's not documented anywhere how to do that. And that's the kind of stuff I've been seeing.
That's a problem in the modern world, and it's inherent. I mean, Doug Song was talking about how, having these people develop all these little pieces, and the cream kind of rises to the top. And that's great. I mean, that's a pure capitalistic model where, I don't mean money, it's just pure capitalistic in the sense that you put a product out, I put a product out. If mine sucks and yours is great, people will adopt yours over time. And so in the long run, now we can talk some economics, in the long run, it will resolve itself.
Right.
Because if you write shitty products all the time, and I write great products all the time, eventually you're going to have to go learn to do something else. But not today.
What I see is in the open source, specific to containerizing applications and pushing into the cloud, is that everyone's got mediocre examples and information out there. Yeah. And what I've done, like this week, for example, is I've kind of plucked what I like about, like, I've read and tried to learn as much as I can, and then based on that, in my experience, what I like from your thing that it doesn't quite do everything right, but it does that one thing right, so I like that. Then I'm going to someone else's GitHub repository, and I'm like, yeah, I like that's, you shouldn't have done that, but I like this, so I'm going to take that.
How do I tie those together?
And I'm tying it all together.
Well, so it's a distributed evolutionary environment,
right.
and
which is great, and I'm glad people are sharing.
You're taking pieces,
is sharing all of their work, and I'm taking pieces
and in
from that.
In the long run, somebody will take the best pieces and put them all together,
right.
and then that
but
becomes
what's interesting is I'm going to take what I've learned, right? I'm going to share it with our audience, and then probably someone's going to go, well, that's not quite right. Maybe for me, or maybe Paul's like, yeah, he's kind of on crack in that area, which is totally valid, right? But awesome with this piece, right, that he took from someone else and modified and shared it back out. And that's good too. And we just need to keep iterating, right?
And because that's the open source scientific model. I mean, that's how science is supposed to evolve. It's like I write.
It's a great point.
I write an article,
right.
and I say I'm hypothesizing this. I tested this part of it. This part I don't know.
Right.
And then you say, wow, I like what he's doing, and you start testing some of these other parts. And over a long period of time, in the long run, we maybe come up with an answer for this problem. In the short run, that's dangerous if you're an enterprise and you're in production because you need stability, security, and so forth, and you just want something that works. So these kind of like, modular evolutionary products, I'm going to stay away from those at my big enterprise until maybe you sort all the bugs out, and 20 years from now, you've got an answer. And that's the problem with the open source model, because you do get all this misinformation. You get good information, you get bad information, you get mediocre information. And if you don't have the capability in-house to put all that together and get it running by tomorrow when the CEO comes to work and wants his email, you got a big problem. So
that's offensive tools in a nutshell right there. Like you're basically, not many people are doing it for real, and all the tutorials are like, here's how you do it on your internal network, or here's how you use Metasploit or whatever. But to do it for real, you've got 15 different layers that you have to come up with, and you kind of have to know how to piece those together and make them all work.
One thing I've come down to is that some of the configuration infrastructure, like, you really got to own yourself. So one of the things that I realized recently, right, especially with, let's take Docker as an example, a lot of people just pull images from Docker Hub and just start running them and get a tutorial up and running. And that's great. I think we need that. We need to see how that works, right? Think of that as your first step. What I've realized recently is that I need to develop my own Docker files to define the container and create the image for my configuration and push it to my own registry to really push forward all of my projects, right? And that requires a lot more infrastructure that you own and maintain yourself, and a lot more responsibility and a lot more learning on your part. But what I found is that once you do that, you're in a much better place. And the registry part is really, I don't know.
But the piece that's missing
ECS is pretty straightforward.
The piece that's missing from security and open source is that everybody's doing exactly that, and the piece that's missing is there is no peer review. There is no way.
Well, there's no standard. What I was just telling our developer, Marston, right? I'm like, dude, everyone does it differently. When I look at all the different ways to build containers, produce images, get them running locally or to the cloud, everyone's doing it. It takes me back to the days of Perl, right? Everyone does it slightly differently. I don't know necessarily, maybe for their use case, it could be perfectly valid. I don't want to take away from it. Perfectly valid, right? But there's a lot of different ways, tons of different configuration. When you push into the cloud, what I found, it's a little more standardized, right? When you go to Amazon, they've got a more standardized way to do things. Google Cloud, Azure, the same way. It's kind of a more standardized way to do things, which I think is good. However, you could kind of pigeonhole yourselves into a specific provider.
The issue you're talking about is that we're in the early days. I mean, I know for us, time goes by, but we're in the early. I mean, if you look at medicine, it's just all. I always draw these analogies. You go back in medicine to the, say, 16th century or something, it's exactly what you just described.
Yeah.
There's this guy doing this. This guy says, if I inject you with this oil of hortweasel, most people die, but every now and then somebody lives, and it's just crazy. And another person is going, that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. And there was no peer review. There was no science. We're seeing it evolve in that direction, and someday that's what it will be like, where there will be an established set of guidelines and there will be an established set of principles, and there will always be people out on the frontier trying new things.
On the fringes, sure.
But there will be people that say, this is how you do that. When you want this, you download this and you spin it up, and this is how it works, and you do these 5 things, and it'll be nice, and it'll be peer-reviewed, and it'll be nice and solid. We're just in the really early days of all this. I mean, we've had the good fortune to be right here at the beginning. I mean, in the beginning started in the 70s and is still going. The beginning hasn't even come close to ending yet. We don't know the answers to a lot of these things. You're starting to see that kind of stuff. You're starting to see journals and people doing basic research and people doing applied research, testing these things and saying, man, you should never, ever do that. But we're not there yet. I mean, we're still in the days when people can run off in the woods and shoot somebody up with, pine tar to see what happens. And they probably die.
AI is going to fix all this at some point, right?
Well, I keep forgetting that AI is going to step in and take care of it all, and then none of us will be needed, and we'll just all be sweeping up after the AI leaves. But I welcome those days, so just remember me.
So speaking of big providers, Microsoft and their big security shocker, which wasn't actually as big as everyone made it seem, I guess, in my humble opinion.
Just the headline made it sound.
What happened? I mean, this was all over the popular news channels, but
it was just that it was an Elastic database. It had some old records in it for support cases that Microsoft had for certain clients, but apparently a lot of the files were redacted. Microsoft had this shut down within a very short amount of time. It wasn't leaked or breached or anything. It was someone reported it. and it was a misconfiguration in an access rule, which this is a clear indication that, hey, this cloud stuff is hard. Even the people that do it well, and Microsoft is doing a good job. Like, this is probably one of the first times you'll see something like this for their cloud stuff. They're doing a good job, but hey, they still make a mistake. So where are the kind of the safety nets and the security pieces? And in this case, they got it fixed really quick, and they're very, very transparent about it. And the security team's doing good stuff, looking at it. But again,
I really think this comes down to planning. Right. And I think it's something that I don't know what the difference is between, like, when we had, I kind of know, like, physical hardware and operating systems that were installed on them, and you had a firewall and you could, like, build stuff and test stuff. And it was very specific like, if I built a server internally, I had to go, like, file a ticket. Someone had to open up a firewall rule, and there was, like, a process for, like, this exposure out to the internet. Now we go to the cloud, and I'm going to pick on specifically S3 in this case, or similar technologies. And it sounds like a similar issue with Microsoft's case, right? Where you have data that's not going through those traditional processes, right? It's not that someone racked a server in our data center, put an operating system on it, put some applications, and put some data on it, then went
strung that wire.
Right? But even before I did that, I had to, like, let's look at large organizations, and this very much comes from, next week. I believe it's next week. Gene Kim's going to come on the show and talk about the Unicorn Project, right? And the, like, basically layers of red tape you had to go through to go. I got to go to a technology review board. They have to bless the technology. Then I can implement the technology.
QA.
Then I've got to get, even before QA, right? I got to get ops to build me an environment so that I can develop and unit test this application. Then I have to go to QA, and QA has to test that application. Then, like, before they can test it, they also have to go to ops to get an environment to be able to test it. And then once it's tested, it has to go to security, and security has to bless it. And then once security blesses it, then it has to go back to ops, and ops has a process that they have to push it into production, right? When you look at all of these S3 bucket leaks and data leaks like that, it's basically people bypassing the process going, oh, I can just put this data up in the cloud. I can have an S3 bucket. There's no review process for, like, Doug, when you go back to your mainframe days, like, who are the users? What roles do they have? What access do they have to the data? Now you just have a user that's like, well, shit, I need to make a backup of this or share it with someone, so I'm going to put it up in this S3 bucket. No one really understands in all these cases, such as the point of sale company, which I believe in this article, that was responsible for leaking data on cannabis users because they make a point of sale system for cannabis dispensaries that leaked 30,000 people's data, right?
Yep.
We've seen this a million times, right? The funny story, I mean, on Twitter, we had a lot of fun with coming up with thoughts and ideas like, oh, their sysadmins we should be stoned, right? They should have hashed their path. Like, the jokes can go on for a long time, but the systemic issue is that it's really easy for people to bypass the system, bypass those controls, put data up in the cloud, and not understand. If you've ever looked at VPCs, IAM roles, security groups, and subnets, like, I've been doing this.
IAM roles alone.
I've been doing, like, networking in this shit, since I was in college, which now is a long time ago, right? Probably 30 years ago at this point. And, like, I really have to I have to sit back and plan what it's like. I have to know my requirements, and I have to plan, and I have to test to make sure that this doesn't leak out. Not everyone's doing that. That's why we're seeing
not everyone's
all of these,
capable of doing that,
right? It's really hard. It's really
and guess what?
It's really hard to do it right. It's really easy to screw it up.
And when you log into any of these sites, they tell you that it's secure. I mean, pull up Dropbox, and I'm not criticizing Dropbox, but I pull up Dropbox. This is the new secure way to share files, absolutely no risk. Blah 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 blah. And you got users out there that are going, I need to give you a file, and the company says, what, I got to go through a 37-step process with a committee meeting before I can copy a file from one site to another? Of course not. I go dump it on Dropbox, and you got it in a few minutes. And that's just, I mean.
Now, also, I mean, to Amazon's credit, S3 is their product, right? They've, over time, put in more and more like barriers and checks to like make sure like
they keep
dude,
warning
you're sharing
you.
the shit out to the internet,
and
right?
they keep warning
and
you.
They keep warning you.
This is public.
Safe.
I have some of those. Like, I mean, I want them to be public, but like, this is public. You understand? This is public. When you click this, everyone on the internet can see this, and I'm like, I want them to. So thank you, but yeah. And so my private ones, you think about it a little bit.
That's the problem, right? You have this convergence of we need to make this very easy so that it's highly adoptable and anybody can use it, and we can scale this very quickly, and businesses are doing it. But you're talking about a very complex and very technical product underneath of this, and there's not that many people that are fully capable to assess this or even set this up and understand the full scope of it. Like now, those of us that work in it don't even understand all of it.
But the really scary thing and really cool thing is you can do all this in code. Right.
Then you add that layer.
So I start reading
just
posts,
code it.
and they're like, well, I did all this in Terraform, and here are all my scripts, and basically I've scripted the entire creation of everything. Right. Your VPC groups, your IAM roles, your subnets, your EC2 instances, your basically firewall rules, right, for gaining access in and out of the VPC. It's all done in code. And I'm like, well, like most people write really crappy code. I'm like,
most people don't even write
my code, right? And a lot of people don't have
I know it's hard for you to imagine that people don't write code, but
people don't write code. And even if you do write code, it's still easy to screw up, right? Because it's not like you have to go into the Amazon's interface is Amazon is obviously where I'm putting a lot of the focus in the AWS, right? But like their interface is kind of weird. It glosses over certain things and it has some limitations. It almost forces you to go, I want to define this in code. I want to use your CLI tools. Amazon has all the CLI tools to be able to script all this stuff, which it just ends up being a lot more error prone, which is why we have these whole markets in security of companies that will analyze your configurations and all this stuff before. We talk about that in the enterprise security week. Like, I need something to analyze all my code that's going to create my infrastructure and define all of my rules for how this is presented.
And don't forget all the people you were talking about earlier that just go out and download the CLI string that somebody else did that said this works, and they paste that into their code and get it working because they really wanted to get it working, and then that gets lost to this giant.
But even in that post and all those tutorials, they'll say like, look, we're just doing this to show you how it works. Like in production, you shouldn't put your passwords inside this configuration file, but you can totally see where that's happening, right? And that's how all these leaks are
and remember,
happening.
Make it work. When you're coding, now you're a coder, and I'm a coder, and I've been a coder a long time, and everybody has that long, dark night of programming when it just won't work, and you get desperate, and you go, oh, well, let me try this. No, let me try that. Let me try this, and then that, and all of a sudden it works, and you go, hell yes, it works, it works, it works, and then you're like, push that baby, we're done. And then,
it's hard enough to get shit working, let alone then get it working securely. I mean, specifically working with the cloud.
And then you got to go back and test it. And when you go to your boss, like when I was running a coding shop, and people came to me and they said, I got it working. I was like, hell yeah, put a green sticker on there. And if they had come to me and said, I got it working, but now we need to go back and start testing it to see if it's good.
Right.
I would have been like, let me put that through the budget process and see if they'll approve the hours, because we've really got 96 other jobs we got to get that are listed as urgency 1. Maybe tomorrow, okay? And I mean, and that's how that stuff leaks through. I mean, that's
tomorrow, maybe 3 months. 6 months.
I'm saying tomorrow is like Italian tomorrow. I mean, it's like, I'll come fix the water tomorrow. I mean, we've all been there in Italy, and I learned that was the first thing I learned in Italy was if they said they'd come tomorrow, it meant maybe never. When they started saying I'll be there in 2 or 3 hours, it meant maybe this week. Mm-hmm. And if the guy said I'm on my way, it meant maybe tomorrow. Maybe not. And then tomorrow you say again tomorrow, and then you're like, oh my God, they're never going to fix the water. And that was a little weird.
Anyway, that's
the
Getting
Italian
back to
tomorrow.
Security.
I've
From
never
Italy.
sidetracked a single conversation.
You just did that.
That's
So,
why
Paul,
you
I know
love me.
near and dear to your heart, Sonos is definitely making something clear for you.
I don't want to be cliche, Tyler. And I did put this out there on Twitter. In one of my comments, I was like, basically, hackers of the world unite, right? And like, if there ever was a case for me personally, and also for everyone who's ever bought a Sonos device in their entire life, to say hackers of the world unite, this is a use case for that, right? And my hope is that there are APIs that are in use today, and my research into Sonos in the past has shown that, like, the security's not kind of a segue from our previous conversation, right? Like, security's not been a really great thing. My 11-year-old son can wreak havoc in our Sonos system, not because I've given him the password or any kind of access or credentials, but because he's like, oh, hey, I can install not just the Sonos app, but any of these other apps and affect the audio controls of speakers in the house, right? So, like, all of a sudden, and we were laughing. It's a great story because, like, we were laughing the other day because my whole family, and I have 3 boys, right? And we're all just sitting around, and all of a sudden, the Sonos speaker is playing the fart song. And just laughing hysterically. And your kids have progressed to like an awesome, just like elite hacker level where I'm like, dude, how did you do that? Right? When you're asking that question of like your children, like, wait, how did you do that? Like, you got to show me what you did to do that, because I haven't shown you anything. I haven't given you any credentials or anything. So Sonos definitely, in my opinion, in respects to usability, has dialed back a lot of those security controls. I think Philips Hue and a lot of these other smart home devices have basically taken off any kind of form of authentication or security or controls in the name of usability. I want to be able to stream music to my speaker, right? To make that easy, the first thing you do is just, like security controls, like forget about that stuff, right? So I think there's opportunities. My hope is that there's an API that we can manipulate to kind of bridge the now, what Sonos has deemed legacy devices, to be able to bridge those to the new devices. And the reason I was asking Mike about that was like, okay, I get the right to repair. I can do that personally. What happens when I publicize that? What happens when I put that up in a GitHub repository and I put it out on social media and be like, hey, look, I just figured out, with the help of my friends, a way that you can use your legacy Sonos devices. I've reverse engineered their protocol. I've published all the details on that so people can reproduce it all over the place. You don't need to buy the new Sonos stuff. You can use all your existing Sonos stuff, and it maybe not fully, but integrates enough where it's usable.
And you remember what Mike said when you said that, right? He said, I would love to defend you in this case.
Right? Defend me, because Sonos is going to be fucking pissed about that. They're going to be like, no, I want people to buy the new shit. And as hackers, we're like, no, we've totally figured out a way
there's
for us. There's
precedence for this, though, right? Like the DDWRT stuff that you did, like from a router hacking standpoint, you're taking hardware that does a specific thing. You're writing a different OS and functionality.
You know, Tyler, that's a great point, and something I didn't bring up in the conversation with Mike because we were short on time. But a lot of the WOT54G stuff, the Wi-Fi drivers, were binary blobs. And this is stuff, Larry and I published a book in 2007, right? Like, why wouldn't you just open source those drivers so that if people have 15-year-old routers, they could use them today with modern Linux kernels, with modern operating systems, because you've open sourced it. So we can take a binary driver. Now you've made the source available. We can modify the code. We can compile it with the latest versions of whatever firmware and Linux kernels we have and make those older devices useful. If we don't, those are just going to end up in a landfill somewhere. That's such a waste.
No way
Why can't we take that and send that to other people in other countries that don't afford the luxury to be able to buy new devices, right? Like, there's tons of great, like, for the greater good that we could do with that. There's tons of things that we could give to schools to learn hacking. There's tons of benefit.
Shareholders don't understand greater good.
But that, and we have interviews coming up with folks talking about the ethical debate of technology, right? And how corporations make decisions based on profit and the bottom line versus
price per share.
What's ethical, what's moral, right? We go back to the Ford Pinto and Lee Iacocca, right? I don't know that he necessarily wanted to kill people, right? But they made decisions.
Business decisions.
That were for the bottom line.
You're not worth as much as a Pinto.
Sonos is making decisions that affect the bottom line. Linksys and Broadcom are making decisions that affect the bottom line.
But if they don't do that, the shareholders come after them and they're all out of jobs.
I think there's also a public image kind of thing, too. That Doug spoke to it when we talked about his culture, right? Like, if you want to help people and you have a culture that is you're helping people and you're helping your customers, like that's awesome, and your company will grow. If Sonos came out and said, yeah, you know what, look, we're going to end the life of these devices, but guess what? Here's a GitHub repository, have at it. Their public image would be a complete 180 to what it is today. There are users out there that like hashtag boycott Sonos.
Yeah.
They're not buying, they don't want to buy the new stuff because of the decisions that were made.
Vote with your feet. Yeah.
Had they promoted the hacker ethic and the hacker spirit and said, you know what, we're going to open source these components, so if you want to go write the code to link all these devices, you can. People will be like, you know what, that sounds fun. I would do that.
It's just a hard thing for people to understand.
Yeah, it would be cool.
It's all about approach. Like you have to frame that for like, and I think that's the problem in a lot of these big corporations is there's a lot of internal people that may or may not have these great ideas, and if they do, they may not have a culture that is set up so that they can feel comfortable enough to bring that. But if you don't frame that in a way that says, hey, this is good for us, it's just going to be people that aren't looking at that, don't understand the technology, and are looking at bottom dollar only and next revenue and market share.
Yep.
Like, you're not going to have someone framing that, evangelizing that, or preaching some of that public image stuff. And I think that's where, as communities, we have to be able to voice that properly and be able to find ways and communicate. If you're a big corporation, like, listen to your end users and listen to the things that are happening on social media around products and announcements.
There's
a big push.
Also, listen to your engineers, because I find it hard to believe that there are not engineers at Sonos that are not like really upset and losing sleep right now and going, I tried to convince management that we should have open source components, that we should have made a development kit so that people could have connected their now legacy gear to the newer stuff, right? Like, I guarantee you there were people who had that hacker mentality, had that open source mentality to say, we should do this because we don't want to piss off our customers.
Yeah,
Look, I've worked for vendors in the past, right? And I'm like, we don't want to piss off our users.
You have to learn to listen to those people. And like Tyler said, there's tons of corporate where going forward and saying, I think we should give away our old products is like, I mean, somebody at some high level is going to say, so you're just going to take all these products and you're going to give them away? These are valuable assets. We can't give them away. And how many people won't upgrade then? And then they start doing all these analysis. And
so I'll play devil's advocate, right? I think it's really hard to decouple the legacy from the new, right? I think we're kind of speaking about that like it's like there's a fine line, right? Or even just a line in the sand that says like, yeah, we could open source this stuff, and it has nothing to do with our newer stuff. All of us have been involved with software. Most of our listeners have as well, right? I mean, we all well know that open sourcing some of our older stuff, the reason why some of us don't open source some of our scripts until a certain point is because you're like, yeah, I just like, that's kind of either embarrassing, there's security flaws, there's a lot of other considerations.
And I'll put one more piece on that, liability. So when that stuff's a secret and it's in-house, you release it open source and people start digging through it and going, wow, did you realize these guys left you wide open to hacks and everything else? People will blame everything that ever happened in the world on you.
Well, Doug, there's licensing things too. What if they, open source it? Be like, wait, this wasn't open source, but you were using open source software, and there's a licensing violation there.
And how much of that product is still in the new product? And you got to go through that and go, are these pieces we're releasing actually removed from the new piece? Because we don't want to release parts of the new piece when we, and then it turns into, what's this? It's the Pinto. Is it worth it?
Yes.
And how much is this
Right.
going to cost us to release this? We got to have committees. We got to have review. We got to do all this crap. Or we just scrap the damn thing and say, buy the new product and move on.
But like also what Doug said too, and a lot of us have experienced with open source is once you open source something, thousands of people are emailing you now going, wait, what about this? And like, can you help me with this? Can you help me with that? And that kind of thing too.
Well, yeah, you got to support it.
And you got to
Well, you don't have to, but
right?
but you'll be expected to, and now you're right back in the snake pit, because now you got all these people writing and going, I don't understand this, and why'd you do it this way, and it won't work with this, and you gave me this open source thing, and you're going, well, look, we don't support it. It's on you. It's just free. It's out there. You can do whatever you want with it.
It won't compile on you know, Mac OS. Well, can you fix that?
And that's when they're calling your help desk, going, you know, they're going, sorry, we don't support that. We can't answer that question. But even then, it took time and it took money, and it's just.
And so there are.
I know what corporate legal says when you go to them with this. Corporate legal says no, no, and hell no.
I know what I want as a consumer and as a hacker, right? But I also want.
But you're being an idealist.
Yeah, there's another side.
Wouldn't that be nice? But the reality of it is that I can just hear that meeting right now in my head. I've sat in that meeting. I mean, it was about something else, but it's the same meeting where they're just going, "What? You want to do what? Oh my God! No, we would never do that in a million years. The liability is through the roof. It'll cost us $100 million in the long run, or we could just not do it." And then the CEO goes, "We're not doing it." Right. Thanks, Doug. Move on.
Let's move on. One more story?
One more. Okay, one more. Is there one more? There is.
I'm debating between tomatoes attacked by All right, let's do tomatoes.
Okay. No, I like tomatoes.
Is it tomatoes or tomatoes?
Tomatoes.
You can code it either way.
Just like it's potatoes.
Yeah, and potatoes. So I actually built a lot of tomato routers. I was
tomato like the operating system.
Yeah. So
so historical fact, I was not a big fan of tomato because it was largely based on the open source derivatives from like the original Linksys code that they had kind of morphed, whereas DDWrt and OpenWrt were very much different kind of projects that didn't derive a lot of source.
I was using it because I ended up building all these systems for a couple of different people that were managing early Wi-Fi traffic for public users, where there was cost associated with the back end, and I won't say that this was to circumvent something at a giant hotel chain, but it was for another company. But I built a bunch of tomato routers because it supported some stuff I needed. It was affordable, and it would run on the platforms that they had. And I really liked it. And I know there's some of these still running today. In fact, I saw this article, and I actually made a call to somebody because I know they're still running this stuff. I'm not supporting it anymore.
Is Tomato still supported as an operating system that runs on Wi-Fi routers on the Broadcom chipset?
As far as I know, I mean, you can still get it. It's still open source stuff. And this was this Mustic malware, which was then being used to exploit this. It basically allowed a remote code execution, which could then, in turn, exploit WordPress. There was a couple of other things on the back end that it was allowing exploits of, so that you could extract credentials and do other. So
this was an attack for Tomato.
This is an actual attack on the Tomato router, which then allowed you to code inject some other stuff internally, most notably probably WordPress. There was a couple of other products, I don't remember exactly what they were, that were being exploited through this, but basically it allowed them to inject botnets into your network. And which was, I mean, you know, this is just another example of stuff that's out there that's scary because it's like bad code. But when it was released, nobody was thinking about it. They were just thinking about getting it working. And, you know, over time, an infinite number of hackers have had an infinite amount of time to focus on these systems and find all the possible flaws in them. So it's if you've got Tomato routers, and a lot of people do, you need to take action to protect yourself from this. It's a worm.
So basically, this is a default credential. admin, root admin.
Well, yeah, that's one of the attacks was that it extracts those tomato router credentials. Yeah, if you're not using default credentials.
I mean, it's just a known default credential for tomato.
But because people thought, well, nobody can get into this admin from the outside, they didn't change the default credentials. And for instance, like the ones I was using, they were reset every single time because they were constantly being moved around. It wasn't an enterprise in that sense. It was like pack them up, put them in the Pelican boxes. Part of the protocol we wrote was to reset them to the defaults because the next group that had to set them up needed the same set of instructions. And because they weren't going to be there forever, they had default credentials on them, and that was bad security design. But security just wasn't an issue when I built those things. I mean, people didn't do that kind of stuff, and it was internal. So it's something you need to read up on if you got tomato routers out there running. So it was a sad. I mean, in the same light, that SSH key story, Fortinet revealed that there's a hard-coded SSH key in some of their devices. And I'm like, that's just, again, it's just the same problems of these default credentials and things being embedded, and we didn't think about it. We just got it working. Nobody worried about it. And then today it comes back to haunt you, and you got a firmware problem.
Yeah, deploying physical devices is hard, right? Or even firmware that runs on physical devices,
it's brutally
right?
hard.
Like the authentication piece is an issue. So like some of the things I'm working on is like in your build process, the password and credentials, like it doesn't really matter because if you control both ends of it, right? Like if you control the app and the database, right? And you're deploying that as one system, in every build process, I can just change the password, right? So like when someone like Tyler comes along and says, oh, like I can get your password, right? I just push a new release, now you got a new set of credentials. Sure, you could exploit that same hole, right? But once I fix that hole, I'm still rotating my credentials. So I think that ephemeral kind of infrastructure is kind of interesting. And the security issues that stem from things like tomato firmware or other types of firmware that have a default password that just gets out there is really bad. It's something that I think we can easily overcome. I mean, the great thing about OpenWRT and the reason why we embraced that was because early on they realized that the first time you deploy firmware, the first thing the user needs to do is pick a password. Even if they pick a poor password, still better than having that known default password that's
But you're talking now. You got millions and millions of IoT devices rolling out constantly, and I mean some of these companies, you'll see them roll out thousands of things with these, different, and they may even all have different firmware. I mean, they may have different versions of firmware on all your thermostats.
Yeah, and that's great. But even if you use a key-based system, if the private key is still the same on all of them, and you can get a hold of the private key, it's the same problem.
It's scary stuff.
It sure is.
That's where like a hardware YubiKey or something might be interesting to integrate into.
Yeah. That's a good idea.
I mean, I don't know, we talked about this like years in the past when you make available a firmware or some type of application, letting the user choose the password is the way to go.
Yeah.
And even
you got to make them do it.
I mean, you got to make them do it. But that causes support issues. What if they enter that password the first time and they go, oh shit! Like, was my caps lock key on when I entered that password, or like, what was the password? And then they forget it, and there's the reason why it was done largely with the WRT54G platform, I think, was to reduce those support calls. Right?
I'm sure.
You go buy a router, like everyone knows what the password is, and I can get into it the first time. The problem is no one changed it, right?
And
so forcing the user to change it.
Check your support on devices now. Call them. And watch the first thing they say. Set it back to factory defaults. Yep. I have been told that so many times when it's going, no, that's not the problem. I don't want to set everything back to factory defaults. I need you to answer this question about this device. Just set it back to factory defaults and let's start from there. I'm like, God damn it. I don't want to start over and have to rebuild everything. But that's because they don't want to support it. They just put it back to default, put it back to vanilla. And then you get people who have gone to vanilla and it works and they just leave it. And then even if they meant well in the first place, now it's like, God, we've got 35 of these things.
Separating your configuration from your authentication, I think, is a huge thing, right? like those factory defaults basically not just are resetting your config, but also resetting your credentials, right? If we can separate those two things so that they're mutually exclusive, right? But that's hard because, again, people forget.
And as long as there's
password is,
authentication,
right?
there's going to be compromised authentication. So we have to find something new and different. Like I would say AI will solve that problem for us.
I don't think we're going to solve this problem on the show. So I'm going to round out the show. Thank you, everyone, for listening and watching this edition of Paul's Security Weekly. We'll see you next time. Oh.